What is RAM? Well, RAM allows you to have stored data to be accessed in any random order and allows you to be working on multiple things at once. So if you think about a computer that does not have RAM would kind of be like an old cassette tape. How the old cassette tape, you can't skip from the first song to the fifth song back to the second song. That's really what our computers would be like if we didn't have RAM. We would have to go through certain processes in sequential order. We wouldn't be able to randomly access information on our system. But then RAM also dictates how much random access we can have, and that's really going to be the size like of the module. How much you can actually work on at any given time. Well, how does RAM work? Well, RAM allows you to have more data to be processed simultaneously. It keeps your system running fast and helps speed your system up. One way that I kind of articulated to a lot of my customers is thinking about your computer like a train. So your computer is like a train. That train has an engine. That engine would be just like your CPU, your processor. Well, that engine runs on coal. And if you had a guy shoveling coal into your engine, that's kind of like having RAM. Your RAM shovels coal into the engine and it keeps it running fast. The more RAM you have, the more guys shoveling coal, the faster your system is essentially going to run. So, if you had multiple processes and you start accessing and storing more data on your computer, it would be like adding carts to that train. Over a certain period of time, your guys shoveling coal can only manage to shovel so much. So in order to keep your system running smoothly, in order to keep your system running efficiently, you would have to add guys shoveling coal. That would be like upgrading your RAM. Putting more RAM into the computer would be more guys shoveling coal. So that's one way to kind of look at RAM, and one way I articulate it when we're talking about how RAM affects the speed of a system. When we talk about how RAM really affects the processes of the system, or that random access of information, we would think about a desk at work. When you go to work, you might have a completely fresh, clean desk. When you sit down to start working on things, you go over to your filing cabinet, you grab a file out, you come and sit back down at your desk, and you put that file on your desk. If you're working on something else throughout the day, you might go back over to your filing cabinet, you might pick out another folder, come back and set it down, and so on and so forth. So throughout the day, you might be working on multiple files, multiple projects, you're working on them all at once. So RAM is kind of like a desk. The more RAM you have would be like having a larger desk space. If you had a smaller amount of RAM, it would be like having smaller desk space. Essentially, you would have to put a file away before you could get another file out if you didn't have as much RAM. The more RAM you added, it'd be like adding space to your desk. You could work on more things at once. You could process things faster. You wouldn't always have to be closing them, putting them away. It's the same kind of a concept when you're working on multiple applications. So if you had multiple applications, you can be running more at one given time. With more RAM, the less RAM you have, the less things you can work on at once. Otherwise, your system is actually going to get bogged down with the processes. Now, all RAM actually has its own speed. So there's a certain rate at which the bus speed comes off the RAM module. Now, what that affects is how fast your RAM processes the information. So the higher the speeds or the faster the throughput, the faster that information is accessed, the faster that information is processed by your processor.
RAM stands for Random Access Memory, which I will explain the meaning of later. Similar to a computer's hard drive, the RAM also stores data. However, the RAM generally has lower data capacities than hard drives do. So what's the use of the RAM? The RAM stores certain data temporarily for easy access. The computer can access data faster from RAM than it can for a hard drive, so certain files are temporarily saved on the RAM. So in effect, we can sort of compare the hard drive and RAM to the human brain. The hard drive is our long-term memory, and the RAM is our short-term. RAM is faster than the hard drive as the data can be accessed in a random order, hence the name Random Access Memory. On a hard drive, the data is accessed sequentially, which is slower. So we have already mentioned how RAM is quicker to access. In more complex terminology, it has a faster read and write speed. Let me give you some examples to visualize read and write speeds. If you try opening up a Word document and it takes a comparatively long time, then we can say that the hard drive you have stored the document on has a slow read speed, as it is slow to read the data off the Word document. If you are saving a Word document to your hard drive and it is going comparatively fast, then you can say that the hard drive you are saving the file to has a fast write speed, as it is fast at writing the file onto the hard drive. Copying a file from one place to the other uses both read and write. The file has to be read from its original location and then written to its final location. RAM is volatile memory. What this means is, unlike a hard drive, the RAM will immediately drop everything saved on it as soon as the power to it is cut off. So when you shut down your computer, everything which has been stored in the RAM gets deleted. The only reason you would want to purchase more RAM is if you're planning to do multitasking, or if you use programs which are rather demanding like video editing. The more programs you have open, the more data which has to be temporarily saved on the RAM. Therefore, if you're into multitasking, then you may consider getting more RAM. One question I get time and time again is if buying more RAM will speed up the computer. In most cases, the answer is no. When your computer runs out of RAM to use, for instance when you're running too many programs at once, the computer will start saving the program's data onto the hard drive in what's called a page file. Like I said earlier, the hard drive has a lower read-write speed, so the performance of the computer will fall. However, the average user usually does not run out of RAM, so buying more is rather pointless. There's quite a few things you need to consider before buying RAM. You should search up the model of your motherboard online to find out the details of what RAM is compatible. You may notice that there are different frequencies. Basically, the higher, the better the read and write speeds. There are different types of RAM also. For instance, laptops take physically smaller RAM, and some older computers are only compatible with old types of RAM. There is likely to be only around 3 RAM slots on your motherboard, and the motherboard is likely to also have a limit for the RAM frequency and capacity, so you should check that too.